Somewhere off the coast of the Caribbean, in water so deep no sunlight reaches the bottom, something is still moving, not swimming, not breathing. Moving the way driftwood moves, the way something moves when the current decides for it instead of its own will. A cannon rests in the silt, half swallowed by 300 years of sand, and chained to that cannon is what used to be a man. Coral has grown through the gaps between his ribs. Barnacles have sealed shut the eyes that once watched his own crew decide his fate. A crab has made its home where his jaw used to hinge. He cannot die because a curse will not permit it. He cannot live because the sea took that from him the day his own shipmates weighted him down and let him go. This is Bootstrap Bill Turner, the tragic ghost sailor of Pirates of the Caribbean, the father of Will Turner, murdered by his own crew for the crime of trying to save his son from a curse. Audiences met him as a piece of walking coral, a man half dissolved into the hull of a ghost ship called the Flying Dutchman, and most people assumed reasonably that he was pure Hollywood invention, a gothic flourish, a special effects showcase built to horrify 12-year-olds in movie theaters. But strip away the CG, and something uncomfortable starts to surface. The punishment inflicted on Bootstrap Bill bound to something heavy, dropped alive into deep water by the very men who once called him brother, is not fantasy. It happened. It is written into pirate articles that survive to this day. The ghost ship he is chained to was reported as a genuine sighting by British naval officers a century before Disney ever touched the idea. The phrase for where drowned sailors go, Davy Jones Locker, is older than the United States itself, and nobody has ever fully agreed on where it came from. And the coral-covered body, the thing that used to be a man, slowly becoming part of a wreck? Divers who worked sunken ships in the 18th century reported finding exactly that more than once in the dark. Today we are going to pull this character apart, piece by piece, and trace every fragment of him back to something real. Not the Disney version, the real one, the one sailors actually feared, the one written into court records, ship's logs, and the confessions of men who died at the end of a rope for doing exactly what was done to him. Before we go under, hit subscribe and tap the bell so the next voyage into this history finds you the moment it drops. Now, let the water close over our heads. The origin of the name Bootstrap, every great pirate legend starts with a word, and the word bootstrap is older and stranger than most people realize. On the surface it sounds almost comic, a small, practical detail of clothing. A bootstrap is the loop of leather or heavy cloth stitched onto the back of a boot, meant to be gripped so the wearer could yank the boot on over a stubborn, swollen heel after a long day on wet decks. Sailors of the 17th and 18th centuries wore heavy sea boots, stiff with tar, salt, and grease, and the strap sewn onto the back was one of the few pieces of a common sailor's kit, tough enough to double as improvised rope in an emergency. That detail matters more than it first appears to. On a ship where every scrap of cordage was inventoried, rationed, and guarded by the quartermaster, a bootstrap was one of the rare things almost always within arm's reach, sewn directly onto a man's own body. It could lash a broken spar, it could bind a prisoner's wrists, and, according to more than one grim account passed down through maritime oral tradition, it could be looped through a man's own belt to fasten him to something that was never going to float. In the final moments before he went over the side, there is a second, more idiomatic layer buried in the word too, one that eventually gave English the phrase, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. That expression did not begin life as motivational language. It began as a physical joke, a description of something flatly impossible reaching down, gripping the loops on the back of your own boots, and hauling your entire body weight off the ground using nothing but your own arms and your own boots. It cannot be done. It was never meant to be done. It described failure dressed up as effort. Sailors, more than almost anyone else in the 18th century, understood the cruelty hiding inside that impossibility. When a man went over the side weighted down, there was no strap, no boot, no reserve of strength anywhere in the world that could pull him back up onto the deck. The phrase that today gets printed on motivational posters began, in its darkest and oldest maritime reading, as a description of a man who was already permanently beyond saving, Screenwriters Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio did not pull the nickname Bootstrap Bill out of thin air. Within the world of the films, Bill Turner earns the nickname because he stubbornly insists on wearing his boots even while barefoot deckhands mock him for it. A small, human detail meant to make him likable before the story destroys him. But the word itself was already carrying 300 years of maritime weight, of binding and sinking in permanent loss, long before it was ever stitched onto a fictional pirate's name. The punishment that inspired the curse to understand where the imagery of Bootstrap Bill's death actually comes from. You have to understand how real pirate crews dealt with men who broke the code, because piracy was never as lawless as popular imagination likes to believe. Every ship that sailed under a captain like Bartholomew Roberts, Edward Lowe, or John Phillips did so under a written set of articles, a contract every man aboard signed or marked with an X before the voyage even began. These articles covered the division of plunder down to the fraction of a coin, the rules governing gambling, drinking, and fighting on deck, and, most relevant to our story, the punishments for betraying the crew. Theft from the common stock, taking gold, silver, or goods that belonged to the entire crew and hiding them away rather than surrendering them to be divided fairly under the articles, was treated as one of the gravest offenses a pirate could commit, worse in many crews' eyes than manslaughter committed in a drunken brawl. Surviving copies of pirate articles, including versions attributed to Roberts's and Phillips's crews, specify punishments ranging from marooning on a deserted spit of sand with a single pistol, a single shot, a bottle of water, and nothing else, all the way up to death. And when death was the sentence handed down by a vote of the crew, pirates did not always reach for a blade across the throat or a rope around the neck. Sometimes the sentence was to be bound, weighted, and dropped over the side alive, in full view of every man on deck. Precisely so, the punishment would live on as a story told in every port the survivors ever drank in. This is where the imagery of Bootstrap Bill's execution stops being fantasy and starts tracing a documented historical practice almost exactly. In the film, Bill Turner steals a single piece of cursed Aztec gold, meaning to save it for his infant son, and in doing so defies the code he swore to. His own captain and crew respond by tying a cannon to his ankles and dropping him into the sea while he is still very much alive and aware of what is happening to him. Strip away the supernatural curse layered on top, and what remains is a punishment lifted almost line for line from the real surviving accounts of pirate discipline: theft from the crew, a heavy-weighted object, a public execution, and the ocean itself acting as judge, jury, and grave. There was also a closely related punishment, older than piracy itself, inherited straight from naval tradition and called keel hauling. A sailor found guilty of a serious offense would be bound with rope beneath both arms, thrown over one side of the ship, and dragged bodily under the keel, the very spine of the hull, across to the other side. The hull of any wooden ship that had spent real time at sea was rarely smooth by the time it needed cleaning. It was studded, sometimes for its entire length, with barnacles grown razor sharp with age, and a man dragged beneath it would surface, if he surfaced at all, cut open across his chest, arms, and face in 100 separate places, seawater already burning into wounds that would fester and rot for weeks afterward if infection did not kill him first. Some men drowned before the rope ever pulled them clear to the other side. Some were shredded by the very shellfish that, generations later, folklore would claim grew permanently on the body of a drowned sailor. The image of a man's flesh slowly fusing with barnacles and coral, the exact image the film uses for Bootstrap Bill's transformation aboard the Flying Dutchman, has its roots in this brutal, entirely real naval punishment. Sailors who had personally witnessed a keel hauling did not need a supernatural curse to explain why a man's skin might come back laced with shell and coral. They had already watched it happen to men who somehow barely lived. William Fly A&D, the mutineers who went over the side if Bootstrap Bill is a ghost stitched together from real pirate history. One of the clearest threads running through him belongs to a real pirate captain named William Fly, and his story is worth sitting with because it is uglier and more human than the sanitized version most people know. In the spring of 1726, Fly was serving as boatswain aboard a merchant vessel, the Elizabeth, sailing out of Jamaica under a captain named John Green. Conditions aboard were harsh even by the standards of the era, and resentment among the crew had been building for weeks over Green's treatment of his men. Fly organized a mutiny. In the early hours of the uprising, the crew seized the captain, and rather than simply confining him, they dragged him to the rail and forced him overboard while he was still alive, still conscious, still pleading, while the men who had served under him for months watched from the deck and did nothing to stop it. A second officer was killed alongside him in the same uprising. Fly took command of the ship, renamed her Fame's Revenge, ran up a black flag of his own design, and spent the following months capturing a string of smaller merchant vessels along the eastern coast of the American colonies. He was, by pirate standards, neither especially successful nor especially feared. His career lasted only a matter of weeks before the Royal Navy caught up with him. Fly was captured, shipped to Boston, tried, and sentenced to hang in July 1726. Contemporary accounts, including a widely circulated sermon delivered by the minister Cotton Mather at his execution, describe Fly as unrepentant to the very end, reportedly criticizing the ship's captain for keeping poorly maintained rigging right up until the noose was placed around his own neck. His body, like so many pirates before him, was afterward hung in chains at the harbor entrance as a warning to every ship that passed beneath it. What matters most for our story is not Fly's own execution, brutal as it was, but the execution he personally committed against Captain Green. The image of a commanding officer, or in the fictional retelling of Father, being forced overboard alive by his own crew, fully aware of exactly what is happening to him and unable to stop it, was not an invention of Disney's writers sitting in a studio meeting. It happened on a real ship to a real man, and it was recorded by name in court documents that still exist. It became part of the oral tradition passed between sailors in taverns from Boston to Port Royal, a cautionary tale repeated for generations about exactly what happens when a crew decides to turn on its own. Davy Jones Locker, where the phrase actually came from no discussion of a ghost sailor bound eternally to the ocean floor, is complete without asking where the phrase Davy Jones Locker actually comes from. And the honest answer is that the phrase is older than most people assume, and its true origin is genuinely, seriously debated among maritime historians to this day. The earliest confirmed appearance of the name in English print comes from the early 18th century in a passage describing a menacing spirit of the sea associated with disaster and drowning. The phrase appears again more famously in Tobias Smollett's 1751 novel The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle, where a character describes Davy Jones explicitly as a devil, a malevolent spirit who presides over every danger lurking beneath the waves, whose locker is understood plainly as the bottom of the sea itself, the final resting place for drowned sailors and the ships that carried them down. Where the name Davy Jones came from in the first place is where historians genuinely part ways. One theory ties it to Saint David, the patron saint of Wales, whose name was invoked by Welsh sailors as a plea for protection before a storm. A second, more elaborate theory fuses Duppy, a West Indian and West African term for a malevolent ghost or spirit, with the biblical prophet Jonah, a story every sailor aboard a European ship would have known by heart, since Jonah was thrown overboard by his own frightened shipmates to calm a raging storm and was swallowed whole by a great fish rather than drowning. A third, far less supernatural theory suggests Davy Jones may simply have been a real man, a corrupt tavern keeper or crimp near the London docks in the 17th century, notorious for drugging sailors, robbing them, and selling them into forced service aboard outbound ships, a man whose name eventually became shorthand for any fate a sailor desperately wanted to avoid. Whichever theory sits closer to the truth, the function of the phrase stayed identical across every telling, in every port, in every language sailors carried it through. Davy Jones Locker was never just a poetic shorthand for the bottom of the sea. It was understood, in genuine and widely shared sailor superstition, as a real destination, an actual place where the drowned were kept, stored, sometimes believed to still be aware, still be present in some diminished way, simply relocated from the world of the living down to a fixed address at the bottom of the ocean. Bootstrap Bill Turner, fused permanently to the hull of the Flying Dutchman, unable to die and unable to leave, is Davy Jones's locker made complete completely literal. The filmmakers did not invent the concept of a sailor trapped forever beneath the waves. They dramatized, almost exactly, a superstition real sailors already half believed on every long voyage that carried them out of sight of land. The Flying Dutchman, a ghost ship 3 centuries old, the ship Bootstrap Bill is bound to, did not begin its life as a Disney invention either. The Flying Dutchman is one of the oldest and most persistent ghost stories in the entire history of European seafaring, and it predates the films by well over 200 years, with roots that reach back even further into the earliest age of Dutch trading voyages around Africa. The earliest written references to a spectral Dutch vessel doomed to sail forever appear in print in the late 18th century, though sailors' oral accounts almost certainly circulated decades before anyone bothered to write them down. The most common version of the legend centers on a Dutch captain, in some tellings named Hendrik van der Decken, attempting to round the Cape of Good Hope, one of the most violently unpredictable and genuinely deadly stretches of open water on the entire planet, during a catastrophic storm that no sane captain would have sailed into. Rather than turn back and wait out the weather like every other vessel in the area, the captain swore a defiant oath that he would round the Cape even if the effort took him until Judgment Day itself. According to the legend, fate, or God, or the devil, depending on which version of the story you happen to hear told, took him precisely at his word. The ship and every man aboard were cursed to sail on forever, never making port again, never dying, a floating warning visible only to the unluckiest sailors who happened to cross its path in the wrong weather. By the early 1800s, sightings of the Flying Dutchman were being formally reported by British naval officers as a matter of official ship's record, not campfire storytelling. Most famously, in 1881, a group of officers aboard the Mspachante, among them the young Prince George, who would later become King George V of England, recorded in the ship's official log that they had personally sighted a phantom vessel glowing with a strange reddish light off the coast of Australia in the early hours of the morning. The sighting was independently witnessed by multiple crew members standing watch at the same time and logged formally as fact, and it remains one of the most cited real encounters with the legend to this day, even though no rational explanation was ever confirmed by anyone aboard. Sailors who reported seeing the ship considered it, without exception, a death omen, a warning that someone aboard their own vessel would not survive the voyage. Within the fictional world of the films, that omen becomes literal fact. The crew of the Flying Dutchman are the doomed, the already drowned, men who owe an unpayable debt to the sea itself, exactly as centuries of genuine maritime superstition already described, long before anyone wrote a screenplay. The medieval myth that came before all of them, long before any pirate ever sailed the Caribbean, before the Flying Dutchman was ever spoken of in a tavern, European sailors already believed that the ocean could transform a living thing into something else entirely, and that belief had nothing to do with ghosts at all. It had to do with geese. For centuries, medieval naturalists and sailors alike genuinely believed in what came to be called the Barnacle goose myth. Certain species of goose appeared along northern coastlines each year, with no visible nest, no egg, no obvious origin, because they bred far to the north in the Arctic, well beyond where any medieval European had ever traveled to witness it. In the absence of an explanation, sailors and scholars filled the gap with something stranger than fiction. They decided the geese did not hatch from eggs at all. They grew, fully formed, out of the goose barnacles that clung to driftwood and the hulls of ships, emerging slowly from the shell the way a chick emerges from an egg, except built entirely out of the sea itself. The belief was taken seriously enough that it appears in respected natural history texts for hundreds of years, and it was even used as a religious loophole, since a creature that supposedly originated in water rather than flesh could technically be eaten during Lent, when meat was forbidden. The myth is scientifically absurd, but it reveals something important about how sailors of that era genuinely understood the relationship between the sea and living things. To them, the ocean was not simply a place where creatures lived. It was a place where things could be made, unmade, and remade into something new entirely, where the boundary between a barnacle, a shell, a bird, and eventually a man was never considered as fixed as it feels to us today. When the Pirates of the Caribbean films show barnacles growing directly out of Bootstrap Bill's living flesh, fusing with his skin the way coral fuses with a shipwreck. They are drawing, whether the writers realized it consciously or not, on a genuinely ancient European sailor's belief that the sea has always had this power to take something that was one thing and slowly, patiently turn it into something else that belongs to the water instead. If a story like this is pulling you in, this is exactly the kind of dark maritime history we dig into every single week on this channel. Subscribe now so the next one finds you the moment it goes live, and stay with us because the story only gets darker from here. Cursed gold. The real fear behind the Aztec treasure Bootstrap Bill's entire punishment in the film is triggered by a single object. A piece of cursed Aztec gold stolen from a chest that was never, under any circumstances, meant to be touched by anyone. That detail, too, draws directly on something real that terrified actual sailors for generations. European sailors of the colonial era were genuinely, deeply frightened of what they called cursed plunder, particularly gold and silver looted from the conquered civilizations of the Americas. The most famous real-world source of this fear is the widely believed curse associated with the treasure of the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma, the vast stores of gold, silver, and ceremonial ornaments seized by Spanish conquistadors after the brutal fall of the Aztec Empire in the 1520s. Multiple Spanish ships carrying looted Aztec and later Inca gold back across the Atlantic to Europe were lost at sea in sudden storms, wrecked on hidden reefs, or captured and sunk outright by rival powers. And this pattern repeated itself often enough and publicly enough that sailors across the following 2 centuries genuinely came to believe New World gold carried an active curse with it, a spiritual debt owed to the people it had been stolen from at the point of a sword. An entire Spanish treasure fleet, the famous 1715 treasure fleet, sank in a violent hurricane off the coast of Florida while loaded almost entirely with stolen Spanish-American silver and gold bound for the crown. A disaster that reinforced the superstition every single time a new wreck was reported washing ashore in port. Pirates, who made their entire living stealing this very gold from Spanish ships a second time over, were arguably even more superstitious about it than the sailors who had first stolen it from its original owners. Cursed treasure became a genuine, well-documented fixture of pirate folklore across the Caribbean. Coins said to summon storms out of a clear sky. Chests said to drive their owners slowly mad. Gold that supposedly had to be physically returned to its rightful resting place before a cursed ship's luck would ever change for the better. The Aztec curse woven through the Pirates of the Caribbean films is not an invented gimmick dreamed up for a summer blockbuster. It is a fairly faithful dramatization of a fear that real sailors genuinely carried in their own sea chests, sitting right alongside the very gold they were quietly terrified of. The sea reclaims its own. Barnacles, coral, and the drowned sailor. The single most visually striking part of Bootstrap Bill's story is his slow transformation. Over the years, he spends chained to the Flying Dutchman into something that is no longer entirely human, a body fused with coral, barnacles, and shell. Half man and half shipwreck, closer to the reef than to the crew he once served with. This image, too, draws directly on something real sailors of the era witnessed with their own eyes far more often than modern audiences would ever guess. Wooden ships that sank in warm Caribbean or Atlantic waters did not stay bare and clean for long. Within a matter of months, coral polyps and colonies of barnacles began aggressively colonizing any hard surface exposed underwater, including timber hulls, iron cannon, and, when human bodies remained trapped inside a wreck, the remains themselves. Sailors who dove on recently sunk wrecks, a genuinely common and dangerous task performed for salvage purposes, for recovering cannon and cargo, or simply for retrieving anything of value before a rival crew could beat them to it, sometimes encountered exactly what the film depicts on screen. Former crewmates lost months or years earlier, their remains partially claimed by the surrounding reef, barely recognizable as human beneath a slowly thickening skin of shell and coral. These encounters were not spoken of casually around a dinner table. They fed directly into a much wider sailor belief that the sea did not simply kill a man outright and finish with him. It slowly absorbed him instead, converting him piece by piece into something that now belonged permanently to the water rather than to the world of the living above it. This belief gave rise to an entire wider category of maritime ghost lore beyond just the Flying Dutchman, the drowned sailor who does not fully die in any conventional sense, but is instead claimed, gradually transformed, and bound to the sea itself as a kind of eternal punishment or unpaid price. Stories of ghost crews still manning phantom ships, their bodies fused permanently to the rigging, their faces slowly grown over with barnacles and coral, circulated widely in ports stretching from Bristol to Charleston throughout the 18th and well into the 19th century. Similar legends appeared independently on the other side of the world. Two sailors along the coast of Chile told nearly identical stories about a phantom ship called the Kalushi, said to be crewed by the drowned, its sailors slowly fused with the sea itself, glowing faintly as it moved silently through fog banks at night. Bootstrap Bill is not a wholly modern invention layered thinly onto old folklore for a summer movie. He is, almost point for point, a dramatization of what real sailors across multiple cultures and multiple oceans already told each other in the dark about what the ocean truly does to the men it decides to keep. The mutiny problem, why crews turned on their own. Bootstrap Bill's death is, at its core, a story about betrayal from within, a father killed not by an enemy, but by the very men who shared his mess table and his rum ration. That kind of betrayal was one of the most persistent and realistic fears aboard any pirate vessel, arguably more realistic than the fear of the Royal Navy itself, because mutiny required no cannon fire and left no warning. Pirate crews operated under a rough and genuinely functioning form of democracy almost unheard of anywhere else in the 18th century world. Captains were elected by a vote of the crew and could be removed from command by that same vote at almost any time, for almost any reason, if enough men turned against them. This system, while remarkably progressive for its era, also meant that any single member of the crew, from the captain down to the newest recruit, was permanently vulnerable to a shift in the mood of the men around him. A captain who grew too greedy, too reckless, or was simply suspected of hoarding plunder for himself could find the entire crew turning against him within a single night, with no formal trial beyond a shouted vote on deck and no appeal beyond the water waiting below the rail. Charles Vane, one of the most notoriously vicious captains to ever sail out of Nassau, was famously deposed in exactly this fashion by his own crew, after refusing to attack a French vessel his men believed was worth the risk. The man who led that particular mutiny was none other than Calico Jack Rackham, who took command of Vane's ship immediately afterward. Vane himself survived the initial mutiny only to be marooned later and eventually hanged, a fate that circled back around to him in a way that felt to the sailors who told the story afterward almost like justice being carried out by the sea itself. This pattern, a crew judging and physically removing its own leadership, sometimes violently, sometimes fatally, was common enough that it shaped the entire culture of piracy far more than any single naval battle ever did. Bootstrap Bill's murder by his own crew fits directly and comfortably into this documented reality. His story is not an outlier invented for dramatic effect. It is, if anything, a fairly ordinary outcome for a pirate who defied the code, dressed up with a supernatural curse layered on top to give it a Hollywood ending audiences could actually watch unfold on screen. The makeup chair, how a living actor became a drowned man there, is one more layer to this story worth pausing on, because it is not about pirate history at all. It is about how an actual living human being was physically transformed into the image of a man claimed by the sea, and it turns out that process was every bit as grueling in its own way as the legends it was built from. Actor Stellan Skarsgård, who played Bootstrap Bill Turner on screen, has spoken in interviews about the sheer physical toll of the makeup and prosthetic work required for the character's most transformed appearances aboard the Flying Dutchman, Sessions in the makeup chair reportedly ran for hours before a single frame could be shot, layering silicone prosthetics, individually placed barnacle and coral pieces, and textured skin appliances over Skarsgård's face and body to simulate decades of slow marine growth. The design team responsible for the look, working under makeup effects supervisors on the production, studied real reef organisms and real accounts of recovered shipwreck remains to make the transformation feel biologically plausible rather than purely fantastical, which is precisely why the effect unsettled audiences as effectively as it did. It did not look like a costume. It looked like something the ocean had actually done, slowly, patiently, over a very long time, to a man who was once simply flesh and bone like everyone else on that deck. In a strange way, this mirrors the exact process this entire video has walked through. Just as the makeup team took real barnacles, real coral, and real decayed textures and layered them piece by piece onto a living actor until something new and horrifying emerged, the screenwriters did the same thing with 3 centuries of real maritime history. They took the real leather bootstrap from a sailor's boot. They took the real punishment of theft from the common stock. They took a real mutiny that ended with a captain thrown overboard alive. They took a real superstition about Davy Jones Locker, a real ghost ship reported by a future king's own naval officers, a real fear of cursed Aztec gold, and a real medieval belief that the sea could grow a man into something else entirely, piece by piece, exactly like a prosthetic applied in a makeup chair. They built a single character out of fragments that were never originally connected to each other until something new stood on the deck of that ship, something that felt, to millions of people watching in theaters, disturbingly real. The conclusion, a ghost built from real bones. So, was Bootstrap Bill Turner a real person? No single historical pirate carried that exact name, and no surviving ship's log records a man named Bill Turner chained to a cannon and dropped into the Caribbean for stealing a single piece of cursed Aztec gold. In that narrow, literal sense, the answer is no. But almost every piece of his story, once you pull it apart thread by thread, is built from something that genuinely happened to genuine sailors, recorded in genuine documents that still exist today. The word bootstrap itself carries 3 centuries of naval weight behind it, from the leather loop stitched onto the back of a common sailor's sea boot to the darkly ironic image of a man trying and failing to save himself using nothing but his own 2 hands. The punishment inflicted on him mirrors the real, documented articles of pirate crews like Bartholomew Roberts's and John Phillips's, where theft from the common stock could mean being weighted down and dropped over the side while fully conscious, and it echoes the brutal, barnacle-scarred reality of keel hauling, a punishment countless real sailors survived, disfigured, or did not survive at all. His murder by mutiny recalls William Fly's real crew, who forced their own captain overboard alive in 1726 and were hanged for it in Boston a few short months later, their trial documented in surviving colonial court records. His eternal imprisonment beneath the waves is Davy Jones's Locker made completely literal, a superstition sailors genuinely half believed on every voyage that ever carried them out of sight of land. The ship he is bound to, the Flying Dutchman, was already a 200-year-old ghost story by the time Hollywood ever touched it, formally reported as a genuine sighting by British naval officers, including a future king, decades before the first script was ever written. The gold that damns him draws on a very real and very widespread fear among sailors of cursed Spanish and Aztec treasure, a fear reinforced every time a new wreck of stolen New World gold washed up on a Caribbean beach, and the coral-covered, barely human body he slowly becomes is not fantasy dressed up for a family film at all. It is almost exactly what real sailors who dove on sunken wrecks genuinely reported finding in the dark water below them. Bootstrap Bill Turner is not one man. He is every sailor who was ever weighted down and dropped over the side for breaking the code. He is every mutinied captain thrown overboard alive by his own frightened crew. He is every drowned body a patient reef ever slowly, silently claimed as its own. He is every ghost ship a terrified lookout ever swore under oath that he genuinely saw on the horizon at dusk. He is what happens when 3 centuries of very real maritime dread get poured into a single character, given a name, and handed a face for an audience to finally see. The curse was never really about one piece of cursed Aztec gold. The curse was the ocean itself, and the debt every sailor who ever set out on it already carried, somewhere in the back of his mind, the quiet, half-buried fear that he might never be allowed to pay it off. The next time you watch that scene play out on screen, the cannon, the crew that will not meet his eyes as they work, the water finally closing over his head, remember that somewhere in the surviving archives of pirate punishment records, in the confession of a hanged mutineer standing on a Boston gallows, in the official log of a British warship that swore under a future king's own signature it had seen a glowing ghost ship off the coast of Australia, the real Bootstrap Bill is still down there tonight, waiting the way the sea always does.